Bai Linen finally further understood about his new master's temperament. The cold, unsmiling youth before him seemed to be dazed much of the time. He preferred swift actions and down-to-earth approaches over flattery or candied words. He never expressed outright disdain at them, but Bai Linen could unmistakably notice his impatience with those kinds of words. That's right, impatience. As for rank distinctions, his master was indifferent to them, but Bai Linen would not dare to be disrespectful. What a strange person. However, Bai Linen was astute. Once he knew about Yi Chang's preferences, he adjusted accordingly and changed his sycophantic ways of the past. He performed his duties efficiently and appropriately. Yi Chang, being naive, gradually realized that the man was actually not bad. If Mr. One Eye was still alive and saw Bai Linen all prim and proper, he might just lose his last eyeball to shock. Bai Linen spoke respectfully. Sir, they should be heading towards Scarlet Star Shoal. They will not expect us to pass through the asteroid belt and head for Reno. Bai Linen now held great admiration towards Yi Chang, for he was always practicing on maneuvering the starship these past few days, and his painstaking effort far surpassed Bai Linen's expectations. To him, Yi Chang's training was akin to self-torture. This level of training was normal to Yi Chang. Since there was no one around to teach him, he would have to learn by himself. He had no choice but to learn the same way he did with mechs, but the results were remarkable, and his skills in maneuvering the starship greatly improved. Since he witnessed Yi Chang's fluency in maneuvering, Bai Linen was confident enough to propose this daring plan, and Yi Chang agreed that it was a good idea. With that, the pursuing pirates figured that Yi Chang would be aiming for the Scarlet Star Shoal, thinking that they would need to recharge energy and replenish supplies there. With a direction, the pirates went forth chasing in a frenzy, while requesting assistance from any pirate connections they have near Scarlet Star Shoal. The Redbeard's Owl's crew leader was killed despite layers of security, and news of losing their starship spread like wildfire throughout the pirate community. Many traveled to Scarlet Star Shoal to see the mysterious person who single-handedly murdered the infamous captain of Redbeard's Owl and even escaped with their vessel. According to Redbeard's Owl's third-in-command, Iron, he saw with his own eyes that Mr. One Eye had exchanged 2 moves with the assassin, and was killed by the 3rd move. With that, the mysterious assassin's fame skyrocketed, and all were hooked with curiosity, for Mr. One Eye was a master in both mech piloting and unarmed combat, and boasted a high reputation amongst the pirates. Since he was eliminated with 3 strikes, how could that not be shocking? If one had such an exceptional assassin in one's crew, the others would almost certainly be reluctant to provoke one's pirate crew. This was the mindset of the captains from many pirate crews. They immediately rushed for Scarlet Star Shoal, hoping to greatly benefit from this uproar. While everyone was in a frenzy for Yi Chang, the man himself took Bai Linen's advice and headed straight into the asteroid belt, midway journeying to Scarlet Star Shoal. Bai Linen firmly believed that he would never again go within 10 kilometers of an asteroid belt. Heavens, this was a nightmare. When you see weird-shaped rock fragments slowly enlarging before your eyes, closing in and whizzing past you, only personal experience could make you truly appreciate the tension. Bai Linen's fragile nerves and heart heavily suffered, and when he saw Yi Chang's face red with excitement, he could only think of one thing: why did he ever come up with such a damning idea? The vessel of the previously notorious Redbeard's Owl was magnificent and mighty, but after thorough treatment from the raining debris of rock fragments, it was now littered with holes, and looked terribly ugly. If Taizai were to see it in front of him, he might not have recognized the vessel that he had personally modified under the orders of the late captain. The starship's performance was also way beyond Yi Chang's expectations. If it were a normal starship, it would be out of service after the painful trip through the rocks. And while the pirate ship's exterior was now all scratched up from the impacts, the interior structure was completely undamaged. When the starship left the asteroid belt safely, Bai Linen could not bear it anymore and plopped on the carpet, with his body sweating all over. On the other hand, Yi Chang seemed calm as ever, even reluctantly casting a few glances back at the asteroid belt. His expression was noticed by the heavily panting Bai Linen, who had the sudden urge to just abandon ship. Fortunately, Yi Chang did not turn the starship back, but continued along the trajectory plotted on the space chart, heading towards the supply point on Reno. This made the anxious Bai Linen breathe a huge sigh of relief. "Sir, we've arrived on Reno, where to next?" Bai Linen asked. Yi Chang shook his head and asked back, "I'm not familiar with the local territory, where do you think we should go?" Bai Linen considered for a moment. "Sir, news of you killing Mr. One Eye must have spread around. I'm afraid many big players would be waiting for you to show yourself." Yi Chang was astonished. "Waiting for me to show myself? For what?" Bai Linen smiled wryly. "Sir, who would not want to recruit someone capable like you? I should tell you that once you announce yourself to the world, they would swarm up to you and do almost anything to get you on board." Yi Chang humped coldly, his gaze became focused and he went quiet. He took out his dagger and gently tested the sharp edges. Bai Linen felt a chill down his spine, and hoped that the pirates would act sensibly, or else, Bai Linen dared not to continue the thought. Yi Chong considered for a moment. He then removed his jacket, took off the black striped yellow shirt that Bai Linen wore earlier and returned it to him. You must take care of yourself. Bai Linen felt warmth blossoming in him, and tears nearly escaped his eyes. Yi Chong's lightly delivered concern won much gratitude from Bai Linen. Even Mr. One-Eye, who treated him the best amongst the crew, did not care for his life. If Mr. One-Eye knew he had a mesh vest, the captain would surely take it away from him by any means necessary. He would never offer one for Bai Linen instead. All these years, he had grown used to being a lackey, with no one concerned with his life or death. If not for his ability to craft out plans for Mr. One-Eye, he would surely have been left to die of starvation on some deserted wasteland. Thanks to his efforts in those days, he finally became Redbeard's Owl's second in command. It may seem glorifying, but those days were hard. The captain ordered him around from above, the crew disdained him from below, and Iron treated him like an enemy. He had not met a single soul who cared about his safety. Bai Linen stared at the protective mesh vest in his hands with mixed feelings. Suddenly, his eyes glowed with realization and spoke eagerly, "Sir, I know where we're heading." Black Cove. Yi Chong muttered, "What a strange name." Bai Linen excitedly explained, "Yes, Black Cove, sir. I got my mesh vest there. No one would dare to make a move there. Once we enter Black Cove, it'll be safe. Over there." Yi Chong was indifferent. "We'll do as you say." With that, he turned and left, leaving behind Bai Linen, stupefied, as he was just about to start a lengthy speech on the spot. Yi Chong sat in a corner, deep in thought. He reflected on his actions these past few days, as was his usual practice. On the trash planet, after every battle, he would carefully dissect the results and identify his mistakes, the mutants' habitual activities and their special behaviors. He had to think about these matters, and this was the main reason he could easily hunt powerful mutants every time with success. After Mu Sheng's arrival, the mech had strongly encouraged this habit, and even made it a daily commitment for Yi Chong. During his ambush on Mr. One-Eye, he was still too hasty and not sufficiently composed. If he had been more level-headed, he could have escaped before the pirates could react, and would not be in a passive position. His unfamiliarity with the outside world was his greatest weakness, but this was not something he could make up for in a short time. The asteroid belt was the best natural training ground for practicing mech piloting. I could also do a little shooting practice on the side. That's something to consider for the future. Yi Chong thought of Mu out of a sudden. He called for him a few times in his mind, but Mu did not respond, just like before. Yi Chong was dejected, and yearned for his old life on the trash planet despite himself being stronger now. While the planet was practically a wasteland, he and Mu could joke around all day, free of worries. Life there was monotonous, but nevertheless satisfying. Ever since Yi Chong left the trash planet, he had not laughed as much as he had in one day on his old home planet. As for unfamiliar things around him, Yi Chong always felt a dangerous undertone from them, and this made him extra cautious in dealing with everyday matters, including what most people thought were normal routines. The environment out here was complicated, filled with variables that far outstripped the trash planets. Yi Chong yearned to leave the trash planet, but now that he had succeeded, he was without Mu's company, and that made him feel like something was missing. At Reno Spaceport, workers stared dumbstruck at the starship that seemed like it could collapse at any time from its damages, if one could still call it a starship. Even the most senior worker shook his head despite himself being experienced, and spoke to the young lad next to him. "I've been at this for over 50 years, and never have I seen such a miserable-looking ship. TSK, I'm afraid even the junkyard wouldn't pay for it. It's a miracle they could even get here. Tell them we're not fixing this ship." The strange thing was, the other party did not ask for repairs, but only to recharge. Yi Chong and Bai Linen exited the ship, and those around the pair oddly stared at them. The pair, however, was unfazed. Yi Chong did not care for them, for he was not involved with them. Once he found that they were not particularly threatening, he did not pay any attention to them. As for Bai Linen, he was, at any rate, the Redbeard's all second in command, and these men were not worth his attention. As such, he ignored the stares they were receiving. Reno was a planetoid, and looked the way it was now after years of construction and modifications. It was situated along the only way to Black Cove, and since visitors to Black Cove had gradually increased, Reno flourished as well. Bai Linen, who was familiar with the area, took on the role of a guide and began explaining to Yi Chong, "Reno is actually a supply station, the last one before one enters Black Cove. That's why a lot of people heading for Black Cove will stop by here for provisions. Perhaps because it's close to Black Cove. There are also plenty of Black Cove specialty products here, and traders who are reluctant to take the risk of entering Black Cove will buy their goods here, though the price is much higher compared to those in Black Cove. Skyscrapers extended beyond the clouds. Flying machines of all sorts whizzed back and forth in the sky. People adorned with various colorful outfits strolled along the streets. The wide avenue was only occupied by a few groups of pedestrians. Numerous shops projecting holographic advertisements lined the roads. Yi Chong looked at his first ever holographic advertisement, showing a semi-transparent lady of extraordinary beauty. She had a flawless face, devilishly sexy body curves and an alluring voice. The combination was breathtaking. Her every move teased the heart, and her soft, wet cherry lips formed words that sounded like music from the heavens, enough to make most people consider buying the advertised product at once. Of course, that was for most people, like Bai Linen. Bai Linen was entranced by the holographic advertisement, almost drooling at the voluptuous lady. However, for someone like Yi Chong, who had never dealt with the opposite sex, developing a standard to differentiate between the beautiful and the ugly would be an arduous task. Yi Chong evaluated from the perspective of combat practicality. Her legs were too slim, unable to provide enough strength. Her hands had delicate skin, signs of weakness in unarmed combat. Her breasts were large but not muscular, not only lacking in strength but also definitely a burden for movement. Her hair was too long and would easily be tangled by something during combat, and that was very dangerous. Yi Chong could not help but shake his head. The only thing that impressed him was her thin waist. Yi Chong had no doubts that it would be very flexible. The result of his evaluation was thus extremely poor. Bai Linen was still watching the advertisement with lecherous eyes and muttering to himself, "That's my dream girl, the most perfect woman in the world. Ah, Feng Su, my dearest, when did she become the spokesperson for this product? What? How could I have not bought it? No, this is not acceptable for a loyal fan like me. I must support her till the end." Bai Linen warmed up to the idea and slipped into the store. After a moment, he exited with quite a few things in his hands. The storekeeper sent him off with a wide grin. Yi Chong pointed at the stuff that Bai Linen was holding. "What are these?" The distracted Bai Linen sobered up and studied them intently. His face instantly contorted. They're all female products. The two did not notice a pair of knavish eyes observing from around the corner. "Did you really see them clearly?" A fearsome-looking muscular man in his middle age asked in a low voice. "Boss, do you still not believe the eyes of your servant? I've seen Bai Linen more than a few times, can't be mistaken." The one who answered was a short fellow with unscrupulous eyes, obviously a cunning person. "Didn't Red Beard's Owl's third in command, Iron, said that Bai Linen is dead. Why would he be here now?" The middle-aged man was perplexed. This servant is also puzzled. Isn't he already dead? Iron would not speak lightly of something like this, but I really did see Bai Linen. Oh, right, there's also someone with him. The shorter man recalled. What? The muscular man trembled in realization, and asked urgently, "You said someone's with him?" "Yes, he's very young, and his looks are average, except that his expression is as though someone owes him money or something. Bai Linen seems to be very respectful to him." The middle-aged man spoke slowly. "He must be the one everyone is talking about now, Mr. One-Eye's assassin." "What?" The little man was shocked. "Isn't he headed for Scarlet Star Shoal? If I had guessed correctly, he must have traveled through the asteroid belt to get here. Smart move. Who would have thought that everyone would be fooled by him? Excellent, excellent. If someone like this could work for me." The middle-aged man paced about the room, his heart greatly enticed. "Boss, what do you think we should do?" His superior considered for some time, and made his decision. "Keep your eyes on him at all times, but remember, do not alarm him." What a wonderful opportunity. We must plan this out carefully." Once he left the boss's study, the little man scanned around discreetly, and once he was sure no one was around, he quickly left through the back door. The little man walked on and on, his surroundings became more and more secluded. The man did not once look back in his journey, and he looked nervous. His eyes constantly darted here and there. When he saw no one following him, he dashed into an alley. "What did you say?" A black-faced burly man stood up as he spoke. His smooth, bald head shined conspicuously under the lighting. "Elder Bay, there's no mistaking it. I saw Bai Linen with my own eyes. I wouldn't mistakenly recognize him. He is at Reno right now. If you don't believe it, send a few of your lackeys out to scout, they'll surely find them. As our elder said, they must have traveled through the asteroid belt, diverging from their route to Red Star Coast." The little man replied with respect. Just then, a lackey walked in and whispered a few words into the ears of the black-faced man. The black-faced man's expression turned to joy upon hearing those whispers. Little monkey, well done. The black-faced man nodded with approval and gave a meaningful glance to another lackey standing straight by his side. The lackey produced a card from his pocket and handed it to Little Monkey. Well, Little Monkey, you must work hard from now on, don't worry, you'll get your share of rewards. Little Monkey nodded profusely, his eyes gleaming with desire at the card as he accepted it carefully with both hands. Elder Bay gave a wave of his hand, and Little Monkey tactfully left the room. Once he was gone, Elder Bay leaned back and laughed to himself. Haha, the heavens do smile upon old me. My elder brother had gone to Scarlet Star Shoal for the assassin, but who would have thought I would gain an unexpected opportunity here at home? Tell our men to prepare themselves, I would also like to meet the one who killed Mr. One-Eye in 3 blows. Bring guns, all of you. He, however fast he may be, can he outrun bullets? Elder Bay groomed and stroked his bald head. One of the lackeys was unsure. Second Elder, do you think we should refer to the leader about this? Elder Bay scolded loudly, refer Maya, if we wait for that, those two would be long gone. Once we capture them, we'll give the leader a surprise, haha. Now, don't just stand there, go get ready. Yi Chong and Bai Linen were leisurely strolling in Reno. By now, Bai Linen was getting a little depressed, where in the whole wide universe did his master come from? He knew almost nothing, and would ask about certain things. Initially, Bai Linen enthusiastically explained to him, but the questions became too much. Usually Bai Linen's explanation would spawn many more questions, and the questions were weird and outlandish, leaving Bai Linen uncertain of how to go about those subjects. Who would have thought I would serve a master like this? What bad luck, Bai Linen rolled his eyes at the sky. What infuriated him the most was his master spouting nonsense about his idol, Feng Su, saying her legs were too thin, her skin was too soft and so on. Heavens, did those words come from a human? Bai Linen felt helpless against his situation. Suddenly, there was a commotion ahead, and he saw an intimidating gang of burly men coming straight towards them. Yi Chong noticed, and immediately summoned his mech. The mechs that Yi Chong obtained from the commercial starships were prepared by Oak Leaves after years of hard work for use in case of emergency. They were all above average, and quite a few of them were expert-level mechs, like the one Yi Chong was now summoning, the humanoid gold wheat. While on board the ship, Bai Linen had seen Yi Chong empty out a pile of dimension keystones from his waist bag, and he stared at them with bulging eyes, pointing at Yi Chong speechlessly. Was this guy an arms dealer? Yi Chong learned from his lessons about running the initialization settings for a few mechs that were either expert level or had unique skills. A bit of early work would prepare him to face dangers ahead without panicking, and allow him to fully engage in battle swiftly. On the battleground, a second could determine life and death. In Bai Linen's eyes, his new master kept changing one mech after another. Was he trying to do a mech showcase? Bai Linen was perplexed. Once he understood Yi Chong's intentions, Bai Linen was astounded. Preparing so many mechs just in case of an emergency. He had never even seen anyone equipped with more than 2 mechs at a time. Yi Chong had set up 5 expert-level mechs, and 3 special mechs. This was practically a moving mech warehouse. Bai Linen watched Yi Chong wear the dimension keystones on his hands with disbelief. If he knew Yi Chong already had a Sand Scorpio on him and Mu Sheng hanging on his neck, what would his expression look like? Since there were too many dimension keystones, they were made to look like accessories for easy carry. Yi Chong wore 4 rings, 2 wristlets, and even a keystone shaped as an eardrop. Bai Linen watched as Yi Chong wore the eardrop-shaped keystone on his left ear without hesitation, and was thoroughly shocked. When he recovered, he could not help but started laughing incredulously at Yi Chong's appearance. Yi Chong did not mind it at all. Ugly. Did it matter? If it could save his life, Yi Chong will accept any degree of ugliness. Yi Chong did not care for Bai Linen's view. The only thing Yi Chong felt unfitting was having the rings on his fingers that would affect his hands' agility and sense. Yi Chong summoned the gold wheat mech from his left middle finger the moment he felt danger. Gold wheat was thoroughly covered with a bright, golden hue. It was like a god that descended from the heavens, almighty and strong. But this was the feature Yi Chong was most dissatisfied with. Such glamour would basically mean shifting attention away from itself would be impossible. If only it was a greenish-gray or a dull turquoise, or even a brownish-yellow, any of them would be better than this. However, Yi Chong was satisfied with the mech's overall design. The hull was streamlined, minimizing air resistance, and the double-layered armor was light and strong. Its main weapon was the ultra-frequency, UF, magnetic sword. A magnetic sword's performance was graded based on its size and resonant frequency, and in UF magnetic sword's power was astonishing. Its UF vibrations could shatter a mech's metal armor into pieces in an instant. It lacked the eye-catching glow of a laser sword, and so was not generally well received, but Yi Chang was quite satisfied with this feature. Unlike most battle mechs, the Gold Wheat was not equipped with a shield, instead it had 2 defense hooks and a small arm guard on its right arm. Speed, which Yi Chang had always prioritized, was also something the mech was well equipped for. Its prism engine could support powerful movements, and up to 8 auxiliary engines allowed great flexibility and maneuvering. However, the mech was completely inadequate in terms of long-range shooting. It only had 1 concealed gun chamber on its left arm, which housed a meager 5K grade Lux blaster, too shabby for a mech like this. However, to Yi Chang, this battle mech was undoubtedly his most familiar and favorite type. Hence, when he first sensed danger, Yi Chang immediately thought of it. Gold Wheat's bionic eyes shone with a golden glare, eyeing coolly at the ill-intent-filled gang. Best to launch a preemptive strike. A preemptive strike implied a greater chance of controlling the flow of battle. In a battle of life and death, whatever courtesy and chivalry present were all obsolete. Yi Chang was also devoid of such manners. While he did not know if this gang were looking for trouble with him, it was undeniable that he felt an underlying danger in their presence. Yi Chang's default reaction was to curb the menace before it began to pose a threat to himself against such underlying danger. This time, he followed his routine without a second to waste. The men spread out into an arch, obviously hoping to surround Yi Chang. If Yi Chang could not have noticed such an obvious tactic, he would have signed his own death warrant. Yi Chang had witnessed Oakleaf's disciplined formation and the unique wolf pack formation of Red Owl's beard. Thus, the current disorganized formation was, in his eyes, absolutely horrendous. Yi Chang lifted his left arm, aimed it towards the gang and took a shot. When the gang saw Yi Chang deploying his mech even before they even reached him, they were all stunned. Some of the more seasoned men slowed down their pace and silently shifted to the rear of the group. They never imagined that with so many of them against one opponent, the other party would strike first. The 5K grade heat ray gun, while being a little shabby for Gold Wheat, was still a terrifying weapon against lightly shielded opponents. A heat ray, thick as one's wrist, struck true at the frontmost man of the gang. The scorching heat ray caused a perimeter of air turbulence surrounding its trajectory. The frontmost man's lower left arm completely evaporated. The wound, red from fresh blood, quickly turned maroon and finally a burnt yellow. The gushing blood dried up in an instant like water sprinkled on desert sand. The heat ray did not seem to weaken after the first hit. It blasted at the chest of its second casualty, going through the body completely. Through the perfect wrist-sized wound, one could see a charred patch on the underbelly of the person behind him. All this happened before the agonizing shriek sounded by the first victim, followed by the second and the third. The disaster before them shook everyone to their core, and all of them tried to stay as far as possible from the 3 victims. The crowd was in chaos. Bai Linen gasped in astonishment, seeing the use of a mech weapon against someone without any mech equipped. He finally realized something. Compared to this master, the pirates were merciful. Bai Linen was sharp when he saw Yi Chang fired. He immediately scurried for cover behind him. Yi Chang chillingly smiled in the pilot's cabin as Gold Wheat's ray gun continued blasting randomly at the gang. It went without saying that Yi Chang's shooting skills were terrible. Although he had practiced shooting at the NR training center, he had never practiced shooting in real life. Hence, while he still had recollections of shooting, his body could not keep up with the movement. In this dense crowd, with people everywhere, it would be harder to miss than to hit, but Yi Chang still managed to fire a few inconsequential rounds. Yi Chang felt deeply ashamed despite knowing this. Second Elder Bei's bald head was covered with sweat. He did not expect the fellow before him to be so ruthless, shooting without so much as a question. He had planned to catch the fellow alive, for a dead man would be useless. The men with him had only heat ray guns of 8K grade, as the rays shooting Gold Wheat's body had no effect. Without at least a 10K grade weapon, it would be impossible to do the mech harm. Second Elder Bei urgently commanded, "Put on your mech now. Right now." Upon hearing his voice, the subordinates around him finally came back to their senses and deployed their mechs. However, since they were standing too close to one another, many ignored their surroundings and thought of only sheltering within their mechs as soon as possible and staying out of the ray gun's path. The immediate result was that the deployed mechs, with their huge sizes, crammed the area even further. The situation became chaotic, and some people were even stomped to death by the deployed mechs. Second Elder Bei hopelessly watched at the situation. He covered his face, unable to bear witness to the disaster, crying dry tears. "There's a good opportunity." Yi Chang unsheathed his UF magnetic sword, as his left arm wielded the defensive barb, and rushed head-on like a thunderbolt into the chaotic mess. The best metaphor for the current situation would be, like a fierce tiger invading a flock of lambs. Compared to the defensive barbs in Yi Chong's left hand, the UF magnetic sword in his right was definitely an edged weapon used to reap human lives. He specifically aimed for the mech's weak points, and the UF vibration due to the magnetic sword's hit often led to the targeted mech crumbling into pieces. Fragments and broken limbs flew away at high speeds, and many who did not deploy their mech in time lost their lives to these flying fragments. The human body could not withstand vibrations at such a high frequency. Once hit, beginning from the point of contact, the body would be ripped apart into numerous pieces. Body pieces flew everywhere. Red flowers of blood bloomed in numbers. Compared to this, the men who died under the parrying spear were far luckier. The sharp, chilling, gleaming edge of the weapon was fatal in its every strike. It moved like lightning and never missed, its victims often dying on the spot. Second Elder Bei did not manage to escape the plight. His shiny bald head rolled and revolved into a faraway corner as his furious eyes were unwilling to close. Bai Linen shivered all over. This was a massacre, and the victims were from the larger party. This scene, full of bloodshed, was one he would never forget in his life. As he watched Yi Chong standing in the blood puddles, Bai Linen could not bear it anymore and puked violently. The scene was also unforgettable for the two spectators who had watched the whole incident from afar. Little Monkey looked very pale, and muttered, "Is that guy really human?" The middle-aged, burly man beside him was also shocked. How ruthless. Who would have thought he would attack without knowing the opponent's intent? His methods are too merciless. This is not someone we should meddle with. Little Monkey leveled his chest, rejoicing. "Boss, luckily we had Second Elder Bei to test the waters, if not." The middle-aged man nodded in agreement. Second Elder Bei is far worse than First Elder Bei. He's ambitious and likes to impress others, but he was all talk and no substance. His leadership was also a failure. It's no wonder First Elder Bei did not hand Reno over to him all this while. If First Elder Bei were here, things would be different. But this guy here is also quite unpredictable, doing things his own way. Little Monkey said, "That's right, this man has no rules at all." The middle-aged man warned, "It's people like these that are the scariest, you mustn't mess with him in future." Little Monkey nodded, still in shock. "Understood. I would rather die than mess with him." "Boss, Reno Society has taken a heavy blow this time." The middle-aged man shook his head. Most of Reno Society's core personnel had followed First Elder Bei to the Red Star Coast. The people here are only their intermediate and lower tier members. However, even if it's so, it would be enough for them to deal with. Usually we can't do anything to them, but now, a knavish look passed in his eyes. Little Monkey spoke excitedly, "Boss, should we get ready to work for Reno Society?" The middle-aged man shook his head again. "This is not urgent." "Little Monkey, you did well this time. First Elder Bei will surely investigate to find out who informed Second Elder Bei of the target. You should go play around somewhere, lie low until the dust settles, then come back. The money is already transferred to your card." "Yes." Little Monkey obeyed respectfully. News of Reno's number 2 murder spread post-haste to Scarlet Star Shoal. Reno's leader, First Elder Bei, who was also Second Elder Bei's brother, vomited blood on the spot, and made a vow before everyone that he would definitely seek revenge for his younger brother. Yi Chong's strong capabilities and his ruthless methods were greatly exaggerated by the masses. He was described as a Sora's reincarnation, or a killing machine. In the meantime, all the local linchpins were reconsidering whether they could afford the costs of drawing Yi Chong to their side. Was all this relevant to Yi Chong? At least Yi Chong himself believed it to be none of his business. Yi Chong was now practicing his shooting skills. Shooting in combat was definitely a very effective mean, involving a variety of skills. Yi Chong could not help but blush at his missed shots last time. Before this, he lacked the right conditions, but now that they were available, he would surely not pass them up. Bai Linen sat and yawned while he watched Yi Chong's practice from afar in disinterest. However, he dared not stay more than 50 meters away from Yi Chong for now. The bloody scene from a few days ago was still fresh in his memory. No doubt many would keep their eyes on them from now on. Bai Linen scanned the surroundings, and found that the few people who were stealthily observing them a few days ago were no longer in sight. Bai Linen was pleased and smiled despite the current situation, for this was his doing. A few days ago, he realized that a few people were secretly watching them in the vicinity and reported this to Yi Chong. He thought Yi Chong would definitely put on his mech, wield his magnetic sword and charge howling towards them, cutting them to pieces. He did not expect Yi Chong to be indifferent. His master believed that they had nothing against him, and so they can watch if they want to. With that, Yi Chong continued practicing. This left the expectant Bai Linen standing in astonishment. The spies realized that Yi Chong did not care for their presence, and began to act more aggressively, throwing all manners of stealth out of the window. However, Bai Linen was no amateur. After years of leading as a general amongst the pirates, how could he lack the means to do something about them? Bai Linen put on a serious demeanor and explained that spying was preparatory work for an imminent attack, meant to identify the enemy's weakness and so forth, and so on. This made Yi Chong immediately thought of his time as a hunter, observing the mutants' natural behavior to devise a countermeasure against them. Yi Chong realized the severity of things and eyed the observers with a cold stare. Bai Linen knew that his words had achieved the desired effect, and so he kept his silence. Against the enemy, there will be no mercy. Goldwheat's parrying spear, held in Yi Chong's hands, looked like a long spear. Bai Linen had never seen a mech weapon wielded by one's bare hands, but this weapon looked as light as a feather in Yi Chong's hands, and the scene was quite peculiar. Yi Chong slowly stepped towards the few observers. Those few people must have not seen the incident a few days ago, as they greeted Yi Chong with a cheeky grin. With a twist of his wrist, the flexible parrying spear drew an arc of light, and those people clutched their throats in agony, blood still flowing through their fingers, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. A few seconds later, they all fell to the ground. Yi Chong could not be bothered with the bodies and continued his training. Bai Linen's offense against them was not personal, but was due to his understanding of their ways from his days as a pirate. They would resort to any means necessary, and if they found a weakness, they would find some way of using it against you. Bai Linen was also an expert in such things. However, now that almost everyone knew that he was with Yi Chong, and as long as Yi Chong was doing fine, he would be left alone, but if Yi Chong was to fall to some misfortune, he would definitely follow suit. Bai Linen was afraid of more mishaps occurring in Reno, and desperately advised Yi Chong to head for Black Cove. After a great deal of words were dispensed, Yi Chong finally agreed reluctantly, since his shooting skills had slightly improved. It was truly a mystery. Yi Chong had remarkable talent in piloting mechs for combat, such that even Mew would occasionally express his marvel at it, but when it came to shooting, while Yi Chong may not shoot clumsily, he was only average in this aspect. Following Bai Linen's suggestions, Yi Chong sold all his average-level mechs in exchange for ready Zwan. The shopkeeper saw Yi Chong emptying his bag to produce a heap of dimension keystones, and was immediately stunned. No matter in which galaxy, selling mechs without license would mean the death sentence. While this was Reno, and the government's laws had yet to extend to the area, this was still the first time the shopkeeper saw someone smuggling mechs as an individual and offering all white mechs. Yi Chong and Bai Linen left the shop with a big bag of gold Zwan. Yi Chong picked up a piece of gold Zwan and inspected it. This was his first time seeing the real deal. The gold Zwan was slightly larger than his fingernail. It was in a transparent yellowish gold color and rhombus-shaped, with many rich and complex patterns inscribed on its surface. The rims were rounded for the 2 to 3 mm thick Zwan, and the material was extremely tough. Yi Chong gave it all he had and he could just only break the Zwan in two. Tough material indeed. Yi Chong assessed the Zwan internally. Bai Linen gaped widely, his eyes completely dull. How could someone break a gold Zwan with brute force? The gold Zwan was said to be able to last 5 centuries without taking damage, and from his extensive experience, these were definitely not fake currency. Following that thought, he immediately felt his heart ache. Heavens, that was one gold Zwan, now losing half its value for no reason. A damaged Zwan can only be redeemed for half its value at the bank. This big shot's origin is really a mystery. He even lacked an identity card. Is there still a place in this world where people don't carry identity cards? The shopkeeper from earlier was nervous from the trade. He did not think there could still be someone in this world without an identity card. The shopkeeper had always charged his customers with the swipe of a card, and did not have so much gold Zwan with him. He had to get someone to withdraw the large sum of Zwan from the bank. Gold Zwan was too high in value, and people rarely keep them in person and use them as circulation currency for business. Extraordinary strength, a callous nature, and a mysterious origin. What an enigmatic master. The deft Bai Linen picked up the broken hailfuls of the golden Zwan piece that Yi Chong carelessly discarded on the ground. He meticulously brushed away the dust on it and carefully placed it in his pocket. The two traveled through a great part of Reno. Of course, the journey was not without Bai Linen's incessant speeches, indicative of his way with words. Yi Chong's expression did not change throughout his speeches, and one would not know if he absorbed any of his words. Under Bai Linen's guidance, Yi Chong bought many energy cells. According to Bai Linen, the road to Black Cove was perilous and impenetrable to starships. One would have to pilot a mech to traverse the way, and extra energy cells can prepare one for unexpected incidents. This fitted Yi Chong's style. With regards to preparation, Yi Chong had always chosen to do more instead of less. At the same time, news of the living Jinx's imminent leave from Reno had traveled far and wide. Those who caught wind of the news could not help but heave a sigh of relief. The god of plagues was finally leaving. No one dared walk the street where Yi Chang last slaughtered members of Reno's society. The foul smell of blood still hung in the air despite repeated washings of the area. They also heard that someone dared to spy on his behavior, and this startled all the local linchpins. They immediately went to the particular linchpin involved and advised him to stop his dangerous actions, and threatened to join hands and eliminate him should he refuse. It was then when someone came to report that the spies were all killed. Everyone was only too eager to see the living Jinx leave Reno as soon as possible, but this raised another question in their hearts: why was he heading towards Black Cove? Upon listening to Bai Linen's analysis, Yi Chang felt reluctant to leave the starship behind. It had such good specs, and most importantly, it had quite a solid build. It was a waste to discard it, and while it may look miserable, that was not something Yi Chang minded about. After preparing themselves, the duo was now ready to leave for Black Cove. Since Bai Linen didn't know how to pilot a mech on his own, he had rode with Yi Chang. The cabin that offered limited accommodation became overloaded when there was more than one man inside. Foolish Bai insisted on keeping the ladies' product he bought from a spokesperson who happened to be none other than Feng Su, much to Yi Chang's annoyance, as if the cabin was already not narrow enough for starters. Movements were limited with Bai's products everywhere, which affected Yi Chang's piloting inputs as well. Without a second thought, Yi Chang winded down the window and lobbed every junk out, ignoring Bai Linen, who was weeping in the corner. He inserted a chip that contained the calculated route to the Black Cove and displayed marked route on the galaxy map. The chip was a purchase from an undistinguished pawn shop by Bai Linen with 12 gold yuan. Apparently the broker of the pawn shop specifies an offering updated routes to the Black Cove. The mech Yi Chang was piloting zoomed into the space, traveling in autopilot mode. After traveling for about 38 hours, they finally arrived at the protected area in the Black Cove, the Elma Zone. Yi Chang was glad that Bai Linen reminded him to bring extra supply of batteries, if not they wouldn't be able to travel this far. The galactic environment of the Black Cove was rather unique, as it was surrounded by a large area of asteroid belt, and the asteroids in the Elma Zone were not stationary. They were actively moving about. In addition, there were countless of asteroid whirls lurking among them. If one were to get sucked in accidentally, one would be shredded into a million pieces within a second by the overwhelming force in its own orbit. It is almost like a huge meat mincer functioning at high speed. Travelers were rare in Elma Zone for a reason. Yi Chang had already switched back to manual piloting and attempted to make it through the belt. A glance at the belts of asteroids that densely floated by, a track of free orbit about 100 meters broad could barely be discerned. It was only then that Yi Chang was convinced by the fact mentioned by Bai Linen: spacecraft of any kind could never make it to the Black Cove. It was justifiable with the restricted space for movement due to the mass of asteroids. No spacecraft would be able to travel through this without a scratch or two. One brief second his mind wandered off elsewhere, and an asteroid about 2 meters in diameter flew by in his face. He froze in fear, and Bai Linen almost chickened out of the excursion. Yi Chang could not afford to build castles in the air, so he drove on with full focus. In fact, quite a large amount of asteroids on the orbit had been cleared, with only a few finer ones that would occasionally hurl past. Talk about jump scares in the galaxy. Out of the blue, a small group of pilots in their onyx black mech humanoids appeared. Yi Chang felt his throat tighten as his face strained immediately. Their piloting skills were brilliant. They flew in high speed, kicking the asteroids out of the orbit using their feet as they traveled. There were no changes in their direction, and they didn't seem to be affected by the asteroid. The mech was like a giant blob of cannonball. The asteroids in his way were all cast aside, and he wasn't hindered by those at all. Theoretically, if both parties were a vast difference in weight, this could happen. It was just like a brandishing hammer smashing away oncoming peas. The catch in this was the differences between that black mech and the asteroids were not many to begin with, yet the asteroids got shoved away while he continued his journey. It was amazing enough for Yi Chang. Yi Chang was sure enough that he couldn't perform such skillful piloting at that moment. Flying at high speed in a belt of moving rocks was not the issue for him, but his traveling direction would be altered when he knocked away the oncoming asteroids. It was difficult to maintain it. It wasn't even a slight change, but a major adjustment from his initially planned route. The group was as fast as lightning, and in a blink of an eye they disappeared into space. As they carried on, the asteroids on the orbit were all cleared up. "Who are these people?" Yi Chang asked seriously. Bai Linen replied, "I'm not really sure about that. Maybe they are the orbit cleaners or something. You know, the orbit here is not a stable one. It would be a real problem without them clearing up a path." Yi Chang knew he would not be getting much information from Bai Linen, so he remained quiet, and his anticipation grew as they journeyed towards the Black Cove. He was having immense expectation of intensifying his strength, and witnessing the skills possessed by that black mech had just raised the bar for him. It was a skill set that was entirely different from the ones Mew had taught him, and nothing else could motivate him more than this. The route was winding. He did his best to focus, but it was still thrilling for him. Imagine a rookie pilot maneuvering through such a route. That would be impossible. The pilot could never make it. It was an estimated short route, yet Yi Chong took 2 hours in total just to travel through. Bai Linen glimpsed at the time and complimented uncontrollably, "Master has such amazing piloting skill. I came once with the Cyclops dude last time and he took literally 6 hours just to make it through. Much more inferior compared to Master's skills." It was a space station they saw upon entry. It took the form of 2 gigantic rings connected to the same axis, and from the center about 5 pipes of channels were extended 3 kilometers long, bridging to the inner ring. The outer ring, on the other hand, was wrapped over the inner ring, and both were working together. The diameter of the inner ring was about 15 kilometers long, while the outer ring was shockingly 19 meters in diameter. This is the outskirt of the Black Cove, namely the SSC land. Looking at how astounded Yi Chong was by the view, Bai Linen proudly introduced the place. It seemed that it was named after one of the founders of the Black Cove, Mr. Yang Zilin. The SSC land is known to be grander in size compared to SS Wei Tan that was newly built in Fall Galaxy last year. He chuckled and continued, "Here is what we called paradise. Anything you wanted, as long as you have enough bet, you can always bargain for one. Service, products, the merchants here would satisfy your every need. Service, of course, includes that special kind of service." Bai Linen let out a hearty laugh. Yi Chong did not show much care about Bai Linen's babbling. He carefully piloted his mech into the automatic parking walkway, but the gate was closed upon his arrival. A few seconds later, the air pressure in the walkway was adjusted to the optimal level for breathing. Beep. The control system in the walkway notified Yi Chong that it was safe to exit from his mech. Yi Chong and Bai Linen climbed out of the mech and he kept it back into the alternate dimension as they proceeded to the gate. Click. The sensor at the door detected their presence and opened up as programmed. Bai Linen made his way out first, followed by Yi Chong after a few moments of being skeptical. Yi Chong was on his toes as he scrutinized his surrounding, while Bai Linen's willowed face turned into a spark of vitality. He seemed charged. The environment changed once they stepped out of the walkway. A modernistic lobby with a big hologram in the center surfaced. The walkway they exited from had a few more other walkways by the side. They spread to the surroundings in half circle. The hologram was separated into different windows with a tour guide for the SSC LAN, and the latest news reports of the area too. Bai Linen gave a cautious reminder, "Master, if anything goes wrong in the Black Cove, never ever solve it with violence. The consequences would be deadly. The defense team here is outstanding." Yi Chong seemed intrigued at trying it out, and that sent chills to Bai's spines. "Master, please. Please, don't use your fist. You might be able to throw great punches, but most fighters who showed disrespect like you had a bad time with the defense team here. They eventually got escorted out. What happened to them, nobody knows. But everyone was sure that, once you were taken away, you are never to be seen again." Bai Linen was sweating in fear. Yi Chong couldn't help but to inhibit his desire temporarily. After wiping off his sweat, he told Yi Chong, "Master, I suggest we walk our ways separately." Like a magician pulling out a rabbit from his hat, he took out 2 communicators and passed one to Yi Chong. "Master, I had set up my number inside. If there is anything, feel free to contact me through this, but nothing bad should happen." "Oh yes. My master, you can't really bargain here, but you can have good deals. The merchants here have a good reputation, and they do not commit daylight robberies." "All right, that is all. Have a nice day, my master." Bai Linen shoved a pouch of gold swans into Yi Chong's hands. "Ciao. Ta-ta." Before Yi Chong could say or ask anything, he scurried away in a jiffy. He looked at the pouch in his hand, glanced around the place, and seeing Bai Linen fleeing the scene. "Man." Yi Chong thought in bewilderment. Yi Chong was surprised at the sight of the crowd of pedestrians on the street. Considering how the Black Cove is located in the corner of the galaxy, and the hassle to get here, one would have expected it to have the least population, but it turned out to be the other way around. The interior of SSZ LAN was rather spacious, so Yi Chong did not feel claustrophobic. Overwhelmed by curiosity, he could not stop examining every nook and cranny of that place, the same as he entered the virtual world the first time. In the midst of the fun-filled exploration, there seemed to be a fiasco up front. He hastened his steps and joined the chaotic crowd. Apparently, an overweight man dressed exquisitely was arguing with an elderly. His oily face expressed anger and frustration, while the brawny man by his side seemed like his personal bodyguard. He had a cocky look on his face as he pushed the elderly, and was pretty self-absorbed too. His actions were merely because his boss was enraged. The bodyguard wielded great strength. The poor elderly lost his balance and landed on his bottom. The man was agitated and berated the bodyguard. The elderly did not mutter a word. He just stood up and snickered while the man quickly forced a smile back. The elderly remained silent, and the man sweated profusely. His fleshy cheeks twitched over time as he continued to force a smile. A rumbling sound of an engine could be heard out of the blue. Who's the one causing trouble here? Yi Chong shuddered as he did not sense the sneaky arrival right behind him. Imagine if the person were to assassinate Yi Chong, that would be a nasty one to deal with. This person is strong. Encountering such power minutes after his arrival, he definitely did not see this coming. He felt excited. Compared to the electrifying adventure he had before, a field of strong opponents was much more preferable. The Black Cove shore is a better place for me. He hardly encountered any formidable opponent ever since he left Trash Planet 12. Disregarding opponents of any kind, he still could tell there were flaws in them. A kind of fragility either in their physique, skills or mentality which was such a turn-off to Yi Chong's battle will. He only had a simple request to become stronger. In his mindset, strength was the only factor to guarantee his life and determine his fate. A man wearing a black mask stormed in. The mask was smooth in texture and glowing in gentle linings. His facial features were mellow, the nose and lips were well-rounded while the eyes were decorated with intricate silver, giving off a dynamic visual. The mask exerted some kind of strange force that made people lower their gazes at the sight of it. The cloak that was as dark as night exuded a sense of mystery and unworldliness. Sweat trickled down the man's forehead. The man behind the mask was Joe Hansen, and he felt agitated at the commotion. How dare the people cause trouble while he was on duty? Looking at the situation, Johansson deduced in his mind what probably had happened. He shot an icy glance at the man, a piercing gaze that sent shivers down the man's spine. He sweated extensively and fear was clearly plastered on his face, which intensified afterwards. Johansson held his hand up to stop the man from speaking as he was too lazy to interrogate or to even communicate with the man. He walked straight to the side of the wall and tapped a few buttons. A hologram display popped out of the wall and replayed the incident. I'm impressed. The inhospitality in Johansson's voice was eminent. You people are actually brave enough to defy the law of zero violence in the Black Cove. So, do you want to come with me, or do you want to fight instead? The brawny bodyguard beside the man did not seem to care. His lips curved into a wry smile of disdain. The masked man before him seemed too petite to bring any harm, so frail it looked as if the masked guy could be sent flying with a punch. He was puzzled by his boss' irrational fear of the masked man. What could an elderly and a puny masked man do? Meanwhile, Yi Chong was cautiously watching the masked man. He could be considered as a dangerous individual judging by how he managed to sneak in without being noticed. He must have something up his sleeves. Yi Chong had a keen sense of hearing as well as his other senses. There was not a time where he failed to notice anyone coming close to him. Johansson sneered under his mask. The corners of his lips curled into a broad contemptuous smile. Everyone was blinded by a sudden flash of light but only caught a glimpse of a dark shadow lurking near. The bodyguard held his abdomen whimpering and his face distorted in pain. He could barely let out a cry. His expression twisted in agony while his body caved into the pain, and eventually he fainted and collapsed on the ground. He did not speak a word. Yi Chong's heart skipped a beat, flustered by what he had witnessed. I could be taken down any time. That was the first time Yi Chong encountered someone who could travel as fast as him. He saw everything clearly, the whole sequence of action. The masked man sprinted to the front of the bodyguard, and sprung a kick right into the bodyguard. His leg was like a dagger drawn from its sheath. It felt like a mere tap on the man's body as he backed off like phantom after delivering the blow. Yi Chong's back was already wet from the stream of cold sweats. Johansson humphed in dissatisfaction, and walked towards the bodyguard who had been taught his lesson of the day. Hold it. A person shouted from the crowd. Johansson's eyes discerned the one who shouted. He raised his eyebrows. Such an ordinary-looking boy. Yet, he stood out like a sore thumb from the crowd. Like the big bad wolf in a group of sheep. A man from the crowd walked too close for comfort to the boy, but he reflexively adjusted his body right away. Just enough to avoid his attack. Johansson was taken aback by surprise, of course. Such swiftness. He continued to observe the boy and felt astonished. The boy was actually in a much different stance than the others. He stood in a way which was easier for him to lunge into an attack when threatened while others in the crowd was standing with ease. This tiny detail set him apart from regular people. The boy had a balanced physique. He did not have a set of bulky muscles anywhere. Johansson judged based on his experiences. He knew Yi Chong was not as weak as he appeared to be. In fact, he was as potent as Johansson himself. Johansson was well aware of the potential terror a boy like him could bring. Nevertheless, Johansson was confused. A body of his build requires a certain type of training which was not known by anybody else outside the Black Cove supposedly. If that was the case, how was it possible that a complete outsider possessed a physique of such kind? Did he spy on their training process? Impossible. The coaching of this place is one of a kind. There would not be a chance for outsiders like him to learn by just peeking. In fact, not only does it call for a special skill set, it also requires other supplementary acts to be taken. If not, it is impossible to stop the muscles from enlarging. The people around Yi Chong quickly distanced themselves from him like he was Satan or something from the underworld. But this made it easy for Yi Chong to move. Yi Chong took a deep breath and immediately grabbed the optimal rhythm for his breather. Johansson's heart quivered and shifted his step gently a little to the left to face Yi Chong in the face. Johansson made up his mind. By hook or by crook, this strange boy before him must be arrested and handed over to Instructor Hack. The instructor shall show special care to this boy, a session of detailed interrogation. We must know who this boy is and where he came from. Yi Chong alarmingly stared at the masked man. The right leg of his, which formerly right beside his left, went backwards much more, about a distance of 2 feet, while his left knee bent way more. His feet that were placed side by side were now 2 feet apart on guard. So it was you, I supposed? The one who spoke up? Johansson asked coldly. His tone was glazed with ice, more hostile than when he spoke to the bodyguard. Everyone in the crowd could sense how frigid the atmosphere had turned, as if time was frozen. Absolutely. Yi Chong's reply was loud and firm. Oh, the cold wind blew as Johansson spoke indifferently. So, you want to butt in? The dark mask shone in polished black. Yi Chong shook his head. Johansson was perplexed for a second. That was unpredicted. He maintained a calm facade and asked softly, I see. So, why did you speak up? Yi Chong halted for a moment, thinking of a way to convey his feelings, but he lacked the experience of making deals with people. He decided to ditch the idea and spoke straightforwardly, I want to learn battle techniques from you. That statement stupefied Johansson. Oh. Johansson turned joyful. This was such a good opportunity. While he was racking his head to think of a way to drag this boy all the way to Instructor Hack, the boy decided to offer himself. No force capture was needed, it seemed. He suppressed his joy and spoke on as calmly as possible. Very well. But you are required to undergo some examination. Follow me then, if you would. Johansson turned on his heels and carried the bodyguard in his arm. He hurried away in a flash. Yi Chong chased after the masked man without any hesitation. The bodyguard was like a heavyweight dumbbell in Johansson's hand, but he carried him with ease. As Yi Chong chased on, his confidence started to extinguish. This is already my maximum speed, yet I can't even overtake the masked man. Our distance remained the same when we left, and I can't even close the gap between us. That wasn't the only mood killer, considering the masked man was actually lifting a 260-pound man. It would be blatantly justifiable that he just didn't have the speed to even compete the masked man. Clouded in negative thoughts, he grew disappointed of himself. Speed, velocity, and anything that sets motion like lightning was always what Yi Chong had the most priority on, as well as confidence. Back in the days when he was still piloting Winnie, he was already equipped with speed. When Mew appeared, the intensive training given caused his overall speed to increase significantly. He also enjoyed the excitement of being fast and furious. Despite that, he did not expect this day to come when what he valued and was proud of was being smashed into pieces. It was heartbreaking and disappointing. That was not the only thing uncalled for. Meanwhile, Johansson felt similar. The race came unexpectedly like a tsunami to his status quo. In the Black Cove, Johansson was known for his speed among his batch mates. Among the other men who joined, he was outstanding, although he was not the fastest, but he was well known at least. Speed was a technique he was an expert in and also the key to his victory. However, he too did not foresee that this day would come when he would almost compete with a mere puny boy from nowhere. Even though he was carrying a few hundred pounds of a meaty man in his hand, it seemed to be a huge disadvantage to the rationale of this situation. He knew that the dumbbell was pretty much nothing, contrary to what the public would assume. So, even if there was nothing in his hand, he would not be much faster than he is at the moment. Moreover, in a brief inspection through his sharp eyes, he could already reckon that the boy had much more room for improvement. It was obvious that the boy had yet undergone proper training since he wholly depended on the speed burst by his feet. If the boy were to remedy some of the flaws he had, his speed would elevate by 10% at the very least. By then, he would be much faster and had been long leading the race instead. If I brought the boy to hack and he was aware of how brilliant and potent this student was, he probably would be laughing his beard off. That annoying beard of his. Thinking of how he might no longer be the best in Group F, a rush of envy surged in him. If that happened, Group F would be exceptionally stronger with his existence. Then Group F would be able to turn the tide. Johansson's mood elevated at that thought. Both of them were having their own theater of monologue as they raced after one another. Johansson was turning here and there while Yi Chong already lost his sense of direction. He had no idea where he was by then. He only knew that he had to follow the masked man. Johansson walked into the parking walkway next and turned to Yi Chong. "Have a mech?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good. Now, get on the mech and follow me." The masked man summoned a dark mech. "Hey." That was the same mech Yi Chong saw back when he was traveling through a belt of asteroids. "That orbit cleaning mech." He hurriedly called in his mech. Before he took off, he did not forget to inform Bai Linen he had something to work on, so Bai Linen had to stay at the Black Cove for a while. Bai Linen had no idea what was going on, but he was more than glad to be able to stay in such a fancy place. He agreed without giving it a second thought. Johansson's mech sped into the asteroid belts beside SSZ, and Yi Chong would not trifle with the new challenge as he went after in his mech. Yi Chong never knew his little wish of playing in the asteroid belt with his mech would be granted so quickly. Johansson did not rush the tour. He just moved on in relaxation, like taking a stroll in his backyard even though he was dodging the floating asteroids. Serene and graceful. On the other hand, Yi Chong was clumsily dodging them. He thought that it would not be a problem to do it in a mech when he was able to penetrate through the asteroid belt with a spacecraft previously. But in reality, the odds were against his favor. It was true that the mech was much more agile than a spacecraft, but it was the first time Yi Chong actually found his mech to be a little bit too agile. The asteroids here were denser and faster than the one he encountered before, and he was being harassed by the oncoming asteroids. One crash would cause an episode of dizziness. Fortunately, the advanced mech contained an advanced pressure buffering system which saved Yi Chong's brain from getting smacked onto the control panel. It's just that Goldwheat's gorgeous humanoid appearance got smacked into something else instead. Johansson wasn't traveling fast, obviously he was waiting for Yi Chong to catch up. Yi Chong followed the masked man in endless crash at the Elma zone for about 8 hours. Yi Chong lost his mind seeing the heavy belt of asteroids waiting to hit his face. He shrieked. "How much longer we are going to do this? Where's the freaking the end of this place?" Johansson was as calm as before they started their journey. Not speeding, not slowing down either. At least Yi Chong's situation improved over time, though he still got showered by the asteroids, he wasn't as clumsy as before. On a side note, all kinds of electronic scanning devices tend to fail in this place. Yi Chong could only watch the environment with his naked eyes. Another 8 hours flight to nowhere. They eventually exited the asteroid belt. Yi Chong exhaled in relief. Johansson flew on with Yi Chong on his tail, and withdrew from the asteroid belt speedily. 2.5 hours later, a dark base appeared before them with lights that lit up brightly. The base was about the size of 10 SSC LAN. It seemed to be modified from a tiny planet. Johansson did not seem to be making an introduction anytime soon as he piloted quietly. Yi Chong had a few questions on his mind, but decided to follow suit. As they inched towards the base, only then Yi Chong discovered the fact that the base was completely enveloped by a protective force. The space around the base was filled with satellites. The satellites were armed with electromagnetic cannons, and that sent chills down his spine. Electromagnetic cannons of such kind would cause tiny planets with diameter less than 20 kilometers to crumble in one blast, and their orbit would be changed dramatically without a doubt. Yi Chong went after the masked man into a returning port slowly. As they were close, Yi Chong saw a protective veil about 15 meters thick. He was shocked. If he remembered correctly, a board about this thick would cost a whopping price even in the size of a palm. Plus, the base had this kind of board everywhere in the air. Even a caveman like Yi Chong who lacked the actual concept of prices and values was having a hard time to let it sink in. Johansson signaled Yi Chong to stop daydreaming and move. Yi Chong followed on swiftly right away. Into the base, the masked man lobbed the bodyguard out of the cabin and someone took him over to the side. I wonder what the man's fate would be. Yi Chong lacked the curiosity to know more. The masked man then gestured him to stay in his mech. They would be traveling at the base in the mech. They arrived at a giant black door. The masked man stopped as the door opened up automatically. Both of their mechs gradually engulfed by the dark gate. 3 grown men stood in a confined room. There were 2 masked men including Johansson and also Yi Chong. The other masked man hurled the same black mask they were wearing to Yi Chong and ordered menacingly, "Put it up." Yi Chong picked it up and felt the peculiar texture in his hands. The mask was surprisingly very soft when touched, and it seemed to be made out of special materials too. There was a code written beneath the mask, F58. He tried putting it on and the mask fitted on his face unexpectedly well, as if it was specially tailored for Yi Chong. His face was layered by the mysterious aura of the mask. It fitted so well that he could even feel the mask mimicking his facial expressions. The mask would trace even the slightest twitch of muscle, and it had great airflow as well. Yi Chong did not feel the stuffiness he was expecting wearing a mask. Instead, he almost forgot that he was wearing one. "I am Hack, your instructor." His voice roared in the room, "and I'll be invigilating your examination. Johansson, take the lead." The examination begins. Johansson notified in a rumbling voice as he stood opposite of Yi Chong. Yi Chong got into his ready stance, anticipating the upcoming trials. Johansson rushed into his position with his arms crossed, embracing himself. He knew that this was merely a test, therefore took a more defensive position. Yi Chong began seriously, a heavy stomp with his right. The room shook a little by that powerful burst of his. Instructor Hack's face had a hint of surprise as he witnessed this by the side. Yi Chong bravely leapt towards Johansson and whimpered as he threw a punch with his right fist. Johansson gracefully spun to the side and dodged the attack. Yi Chong missed, and almost fell from losing his balance. It would be an opportunity to experience Johansson's counterattack, but he remained on the defensive side and patiently waited for Yi Chong's next strike. Yi Chong regained his stance and was prepared to launch the following punches. He raised his fist, but before he could come into contact with Johansson, a thunderous voice broke his action. "Stop right there." Instructor Hack ended the little fight between them. "Enough." Yi Chong was dumbfounded. "I was evaluated with only a punch." Johansson seemed to be much more aware of such interruption through his gesture. Instructor Hack walked to Yi Chong and stared into his eyes. "I don't care who you were. I don't know where you came from, and I don't want to know what you have worked for. From now on, this mask is yours. As long as you are in the Black Cove, you shall never remove this mask. Never. Ever. Anytime or anywhere. Your code would be F58. You will be the 58th member of Group F now. State your name." Yi-. Zeta name. Everyone here uses a pseudonym or a code name. Right before Yi Chong actually gave his actual name away, Instructor Hack interrupted him with a gentle reminder. Yi Chong did not ponder much on this request. "Mew. I am Mew." The name slipped right off his mouth so naturally. "Follow Johansson to your campsite now. It's Group F. He would arrange the accommodation for you," Instructor Hack ordered. "Welcome to the world of real pilots," he said sternly. On the way to his campsite, Johansson lectured him some exclusive rules of survival in Black Cove. Firstly, never inquire anything about someone. This would create enemies without knowing. Secondly, never expose personal details about yourself to the others. That was to guarantee your life in the Black Cove. Thirdly, never demonstrate your true strength in order to live longer. Johansson mentioned the grave rules nonchalantly. Even though that was alarming enough for Yi Chong to be aware of the hidden danger of this place. Yi Chong started to tense. Johansson in the meantime somehow was able to identify the alert in Yi Chong's eyes. His own eyes expressed approval. The campsite for Group F was quite spacious. However, Johansson did not seem to be in the mood to give Yi Chong a tour of the place. He just guided him all the way to an empty room. "This will be your room. You will be living here from now on," Johansson said as he pointed at the room. "If you want food, there's a cafeteria. We passed it a while ago. You should know." Yi Chong nodded. "Good. Go find Instructor Hack yourself tomorrow. He will be teaching you some tricks." Johansson left the scene after that. Johansson's unfriendliness wasn't foreign to Yi Chong. He was more used to adapting to surroundings all by himself. On the contrary, if people were too friendly to him when they first met, it would bring him discomfort, and he would be unable to blend in well. Although this was an unoccupied room, it still required fingerprint and palm print verification in order to check in, but that wasn't new to Yi Chong either. It did not take him much time to set up the security system. The room was well furnished, and was a large room too compared to his home back in Trash Planet 12. This was at a much larger scale. There were a number of things that Yi Chang did not come across in his life. He had yet to use them before. For starters, he tried experimenting with gadgets in the room just to find out what they did and how they were used. Luckily, Yi Chang wasn't a greenhorn to electronic devices, and they were much simpler in his eyes. Soon, he understood the method to use every item in the room. He took a shower before drifting off to sleep. Yi Chang rose early the next day as the grumbling of his tummy woke him up. He ran to the cafeteria right away. He thought that he came early enough without knowing there was already a crowd. Everyone was taking their breakfast silently. The cafeteria was filled with people, and was roomy as well, but it was dead. The atmosphere felt so tense it was too stressful to stay. He had a hearty breakfast, scrumptious food wafted down to Yi Chang's tummy. The food was new to him and he finished up happily. Still, the atmosphere was rather somber. Yi Chang finished his breakfast and went to the place where he saw Instructor Hack the day before. On the way there, he noticed that everyone was indeed wearing their masks, but he did not see anyone greeting each other. This place was somber enough for folks of the outside world. But to a man who was used to living alone like Yi Chang, such simple life without interaction was rather relaxing. He arrived at Instructor Hack's place, and spotted the instructor teaching something to a member. Yi Chang recalled what Johansson had told him before, so he withdrew himself and waited by the side quietly. Instructor Hack had already seen Yi Chang right when he arrived. He was impressed at how Yi Chang did not approach him out of curiosity, but waited at the side with patience instead. The instructor's eyes shone with admiration. Yi Chang waited for 30 minutes for that member to exit the room as Instructor Hack waved at him. He entered the room without a delay. The instructor initiated the conversation. The fight yesterday was just to identify your level, while what we are going to do today would be testing you in a variety of skills. Come with me. Both of them moved to a room filled with apparatus. Moments later, Instructor Hack looked through the test report of Yi Chang's performance. His jaw dropped as he stared on in blank dismay. The outcome of the test was more than just astonishing. If he did not observe Yi Chang's tests with his own eyes, he would never believe the results in his hand, from someone who had not undergone the Black Cove's training. He was under 22. His physique was in tip-top condition. He was the first one of a kind that Instructor Hack came across. Even the dummy in group would not be on par with Yi Chang before training. Speed was the most outstanding aspect of his performance. In full force, his running speed could hit 5.32 Hz. Even Johansson, the best runner in the group, could only go as fast as 5.54 Hz after the training. How astounding! His strength was remarkable as well. How could he possess such intense amount of strength without changing the physical attribute of his body, and not to mention the absence of special training in the Black Cove? Instructor Hack had his doubts. Technically, he wasn't the only one who was puzzled by this oddity. Mu's processors nearly malfunctioned when he tried to figure out the cause behind it. Eventually, Mu gave up and decided that Yi Chang was an oddball to reason everything. But with this amount of power, Instructor Hack could imagine if the infamous power creep Fatrani, who excelled similarly in strength, was notified of this boy's existence, chances are he would come barging in, smash the door and drag this boy away. Of course, this time, Instructor Hack was affirmed with his new student. He would never let that happen despite that power freak's rampage. This Mu boy was extremely good with his balancing and dexterity too. The instructor could see that when he did sharp turnings at high speed, his action was swift and flexible, there wasn't any pause at all. He was also calm and smart, which was really important. To top it off, the most shocking part to Instructor Hack was the speed of the boy's hands attack. An absolute fearsome velocity to one's eyes. These are a pair of hands with frightening speed. Instructor Hack never thought of anyone outside the Black Cove that could have such speed. The hands were known to be the most agile part of the body, as well as being capable to do various tasks. The agility of the hands is directly proportional to the number of tasks one could do in a set amount of time. In simpler terms, the faster one's hand is, the more tasks one could complete in limited time. Thus, its significance does not require much explanation. Edging between life and death, one's outcome could possibly be determined by actions that are taken or decisions made in that few milliseconds. Such outstanding speed was truly a rare sight in the Black Cove. This boy that stood before Instructor Hack seemed to have yet to be aware of the true power of his own hands. Instructor Hack looked at Yi Chang standing still at the side, nodding his head in approval. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yi Chang did not mutter a word. He stood on in silence. Suddenly, a thought crossed the instructor's mind, and it took him a while to phrase it in a way that this little boy could comprehend. Tell me what you know about being a pilot. Yi Chong tilted his head as he thought about it, the controller of the mech. Well. He nodded his head, that's what people would normally assume. The reply surprised Yi Chong as he raised his head, looking at the instructor with his eyes enlarged. The pilots. Instructor Hack explained calmly with a kind of unidentified nostalgia in his tone, they aren't what you all had always assumed to be. How the world outside defines the pilots and how the world examined them, they were absurd and meaningless. Fee. Those are just some assumptions for kids. The real world of pilots is beyond your imagination. And beyond your knowledge too. Everyone from the outside would never know and no one would ever understand. Do you know what the pilots formerly were? Yi Chong shook his head. The pilots used to be the kind who adores power. The advancement of the age of machinery allowed people to realize the power hidden within the gears. The ancient martial arts and the sorcery from the tradition soon vanished, and in return, the emergence of the pilots. However, in later times, people started to discover the more potent outcome and a much higher survivability when the mech was actually piloted by a martial artist or a sorcerer. Then, it so happened that the people combined the artistry of martial arts, sorcery and mech piloting, forming the new generation of pilots. These pilots when unarmed were barely an opponent to go against the classic martial artist or sorcerer, but if they were to mount onto a mech, they could exert immense strength. Instructor Hack carried on with his explanation about one particular incident that changed the world. About 500 years ago, there was a crisis, a never-before-seen crisis, a big one, and many had perished. Most of the surviving men turned out to be actual pilots, while this inevitably led to the ending of the other kinds of forces. 300 years ago, something catastrophic happened again. Pilots were dispersed throughout the galaxy and known by the outside world. But what they got in the end was undoubtedly rather obsolete. Still, regarding what actually happened in the past, what connected the beginning and the ending of the history, I had no idea either. Quickly, the instructor added, anyway, it was not easy to educate people of your kind from the 5 major galaxies to understand the concept of ancient martial arts and sorcery. Yi Chong's heart trembled. There was such a backstory to this. I never knew. Since Instructor Hack could tell such tale directly from his mouth, it seemed that he wasn't the man from the 5 major galaxies too. He might came from somewhere that was unknown by the others, and that particular place somehow had a strange connection to the galaxies. The major elements of a pilot. He lectured as he continued emphasizing the salutation to the more than just mech controller he knew, our physique, mech and mentality. And these also directly caused the formation of 3 major schools, one being the kind that combined martial arts and technology, strives to obtain the ultimate body, another being the kind that incorporated sorcery into technology. Yes, the mentality for such kind is usually much stronger, and there's this kind who does purely machinery. To be frank, this is the most hated school out of the 3 because they perform direct modification towards your body, turning them into a chimera or something. They neither look like humans nor machines. But I must say they are still strong in their nature. It is undeniable to say that they also had the most advanced mech out of all the schools. Even though Instructor Hack expressed blatant disgust and hatred as he spoke, he still acknowledged their strength. Yi Chong was enjoying every bit of the storytelling. He was all ears, all eyes and all heart. You must have figured it out by now, boy. We are the first school, but I can't deny the fact that the martial arts do have an amazing effect on the development of anatomy. The ancient arts were great and grand. Nevertheless, we only extracted a small part of it to be utilized. He looked at Yi Chong. I had no idea how you did your training before, and I don't see you having any kind of energy pulse. But you do have immense muscle strength, and oddly every fabric of your muscle had barely enlarged like what others should have. This is confusing to me. He expressed his puzzlement towards this anomaly before him, but he didn't seem to be interested to investigate further. All right, come with me. Instructor Hack led Yi Chong into a large lobby. There were quite a number of oviform apparatus. The outer shell of the apparatus was made out of a transparent material. There was a kind of silver liquid inside, and it looked rather sticky. Among the apparatus, a few were occupied by humans as they immersed into it with their eyes closed. They looked serene and enjoyed using the apparatus. Instructor Hack said, pointing at one of the empty oval capsule, "Go on, and give it a try." Yi Chong walked towards the capsule with suspicion. The capsule uncapped, an opening just enough to fit Yi Chong in, and Yi Chong walked into it. Yi Chong was fully enclosed in the capsule. The silver liquid sprinkled from underneath, filling up the space, starting from the leg, to the knees, then the waist and the chest, but stopped at the neck eventually. Lethargy surged through his body, and every inch of his muscle felt warm. It was so comfortable that Yi Chong felt like yawning. He started to become sleepy, yet he somehow felt perfectly conscious at the same time, stuck in between the state of sleep and being awake. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Chang jumped awake. He saw how the instructor scrutinized him carefully, wondering what he was thinking under that black mask of his. The silver liquid ebbed away like sea tides, and in a blink of an eye, the liquid in the capsule was drained completely. Yi Chang was shocked to see there wasn't even a single drop of silver liquid left behind, while his clothing was in the same condition as when he entered. It was not wet, it was not tainted either. How was it? The instructor asked as Yi Chang stepped out of the capsule. Yi Chang nodded. Good. Pretty good. Now. The instructor's eyes gleamed peculiarly. Do you feel energized? Does your whole body feel like it's filled with strength that is anticipating to be unleashed? He did notice it right away when the silver liquid retreated from his body. He felt hot, his body was heated up and fully charged again. The need to unleash his immense strength took over his thoughts at the mention of it from the instructor. He nodded his head right away. Come with me. Instructor Hack brought Yi Chang to a spacious training field. There were various kinds of training facilities. You are going to use up all your stamina here. Head back to the capsule after and use the facilities again. Repeat the process 3 times and you are good to go. Alright, it's up to you now. He walked away. He obeyed his instructor's order obediently. He drained all his strength every single time and returned to the capsule for a quick recharge. In the capsule, he could feel his strength charging up again, bit by bit. It felt perplexing indeed. He rushed back to the field to exhaust his stamina after charging, and noticed the intensive boost in his stamina recovery when he dipped in the capsule. After that, he no longer felt the heat, he started to get used to it and reacted normally. It was almost dawn when he finished his training, but he did not feel hungry at all when he was done. It was surprising because he did not have a meal at all. He believed it could be one of the effects of the silver liquid. He found his old partner in training, the metallic marbles in the field. He grabbed a handful of them into his pocket and went back to his room. He met Johansson on the way back, but they did not exchange words. Instead, they nodded at each other politely and went their separate ways. Like and subscribe.